Hi, it's Carly McAvoy. I'm doing part 2 of the 3-part final practice. So probably going to take me 3, I think, because this is going to take a little while. I am going quickly on this. Slow me down, but the best thing to do is to turn it off, work the problems yourself first, and then go on and see if you got it right and see what problems you need to watch me do. When it says factor completely, means it could be any type of factoring that you have to do. Always look to see if there's a common factor first. There is here. I'm going to take the 2 out. If I take out the 2, I'm left with 2x squared minus 9x minus 5. If I wanted to use the box for this, I could make a box over here and say I have 2x squared, I have negative 5, and down here I want negative 9x. Then 2x squared has to be 2x times x, and 5, well, it's 1 times 5, but I want 9, so I think I do want the 5 up here and the 1 here. That gives me 10x and x, and I need negative, so I want the negative 10x, which means negative 5. And now the answer is on the diagonal, so my answer is going to be, don't forget this 2, out front 2, and then x minus 5. It doesn't matter what order you write this in, and 2x plus 1, and that would be the fully factored answer. Remember, if you factor out a number in the beginning, it should be part of your answer at the end. This part is a factor by grouping problem. I'm going to group these 2 parts together, 2 terms, excuse me, and then add, and then group these 2 terms together. And then I'm going to say, what do these have in common? They both have a y, so I'm going to divide both of those terms by y, leaving the x minus 5. And then what do these 2 terms have in common? Remember, I never want a negative term in the beginning, so I'm going to factor out a negative 2. That's going to leave x minus 5. Factoring out a negative 2 means divide both of those things by negative 2. What do I have in common? I have an x minus 5 in common. What if I took out what I had in common? What's left? I have a y minus 2. You can always FOIL that out and you will get those 4 terms back again. In the last one we have a difference of squares, but there is a common factor, so I'm going to take out 4, leaving x squared minus 4. Then I'm going to see that that's still a difference of squares, so I'm going to have x plus 2 and x minus 2 because the square root of 4 is 2, and I've got the plus and the minus of that. That's going to end that problem. Now it says solve the quadratic equation by factoring, and this is a tough one. There's no common factor here. At least I found it to be a little more challenging when I worked it out before I started this. The first term is 12x squared, the last term is negative 6, and the term in the middle is positive 1x. And we have to find something that works for that. And so it took me a little while to figure that out, but just to jump to the answer, we have 3x times 4x is 12x, and then we have 6 is 2 times 3. And if I did, you can use pencil and then make a mistake and erase. If I did 2 times 3 here, I would get 6 and 12. And I don't want that, so I'm going to switch that around. What if I do 3 and 2? Well, in this case, I don't know what I wrote before, but I wrote it in the wrong order. Now I'm writing in the right order. So I have 9x and 8x. And I want there to be a positive x. So I want positive 9 and I want negative 8. So I'm going to make this negative so that I get that negative 8. So my answer is on the diagonal. And I didn't factor anything out on this one. So it's going to be 4x plus 3. And 3x minus 2. But this is not just a factoring problem, this is a solve, and so we're going to solve that by setting those both parts equal to 0 and solving. Subtract 3 from both sides. Over here we're going to add 2 to both sides, then divide by 4 and divide by 3, and x equals 2/3. So we have x equals negative 3/4 or positive 2/3. Doesn't matter which one you write first, but remember that you can't just factor and stop. You have to solve when you have it set equal to 0. This one's a little easier. It's a difference of squares, and it factors like this: m plus 10 and m minus 10, because the square root of 100 is 10, so we have the positive and the negative of that. And now I'm going to set those two things equal to 0 and subtract 10 from both sides and add 10 to both sides, and I have 10 and negative 10 as my answers. You can say something like m equals plus or minus 10. That works. You can set them equal. You can just stop there and circle that, but you should know you have two answers because you had an equation to the second power. Okay, the next one, you have to set up your problem. This is a little harder. Word problems, usually harder for people. The length of a rectangle is 6 inches longer than it is wide. So just a picture of that. Here's our rectangle, and here's the length is 6 inches longer than it is wide. And what's the dimensions? If the area is 40 inches squared, now remember, length times width is how we find the rectangle, so we're just going to say width times length equals 40. Distribute here, w squared plus 6w. I'm going to subtract 40 from both sides to bring that over to the other side, and then I can find that factor by putting that into the box, or maybe you don't need to. But because we have choices here of 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. But you can see if we want 6, it has to be that 4 and 10 pair. So maybe you don't need the box by now, but if you do, then use it. It's a tool, or whatever tool you're using. And then I'm going to say that's 4 and 10. And I want 6 positives, so I want the 10 to be positive so that I have more positives than negatives, and you can always FOIL that out to check it. And then I have the possibility of the width could be 4. Well, that's because w minus 4 equals 0, so if I add 4 to both sides, and so you can see here I could do the same thing, the width plus 10 equals 0, and if I subtracted 10 I'd get negative 10. But it doesn't make sense to have a negative width, so that's an extraneous solution. We don't like it, so it must be that our width equals 4 inches because it was inches squared, and then our length is 6 more than that, so our length is 4 plus 6, or 10 inches. So you can see that we got our two dimensions here, but we just got one in the negative and one in the positive. Okay, the next one is the shortest leg of a triangle is 2 inches shorter than the other leg. So if we have, it should be right triangle, should say right triangle in there really, to be honest, but it's 2 inches, so we have a short leg, which I'm going to call X, and we have another one that's, the shortest leg is 2 inches shorter than the other leg, so the other leg is X and the shorter leg is X minus 2, it's 2 inches shorter. And then we have hypotenuse, that's 10. So using the Pythagorean theorem, we have x squared, x minus 2 squared, and 10 squared. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. And so that gives us x squared plus x squared minus 4x plus 4 equals 100. And x squared is 2x squared minus 4x. I'm going to subtract 100 from both sides and get negative 96. And then I'm going to factor that. Again, I can see that there's a common factor of 2. Now before, when I took out a 2, I had to leave that in the answer. But when I have a 0 or have an equal sign, I can just divide everything by 2 and get rid of that 2 altogether. So that gives me x squared minus 2x minus 48 equals 0. And then I have to factor that thing. And again, you might need to use the box or some other method. I can see that 48 is 6 times 8, so I'm going to say it's 6 and 8. I want more negatives. That means I want negative 8 and positive 6. If I set those two things equal to 0, I can easily solve that. I see x is negative 6 or x is 8. Negative 6 doesn't make sense for the length of a side. That means our x is 8. This is inches again. So x equals 8 inches. X minus 2 equals 6 inches. So we have a 6, 8, 10 triangle, which is just the 3, 4, 5 multiplied by 2. Okay, that's going to be it for this video, and I'll be back to do the third part and talk more about the final in the final video.